Hi, I'm Mignon Fogarty, Grammar Girl, and I'm here today with Lee Falin, Everyday Einstein from the Quick and Dirty Tips Network.
Hello,
Hi, Lee. Thanks. Lee is joining us all the way from London. Is that right?
Cambridge, England.
Cambridge.
Cambridge, England, yeah.
Awesome. So it's about midnight his time. So thank you for joining me at
No
a
problem.
reasonable time. So the reason we're here today is because I received an email from a listener about a podcast I did a few weeks ago. Jonathan McIntosh said in a previous podcast I had said I had just a theory, and he took objection to my use of theory. He said a theory is tantamount to fact. What you were doing is speculating. Please don't spread this misuse of the word theory. It's an important distinction. Saying just a theory devalues the excruciating hard work of many scientists. Gravity, for example, would be just a theory. And as a former scientist, I know exactly what he means, because theory has a different meaning in science than it does in everyday use. So, Lee, can you enlighten me and our audience on the scientific meaning of the word theory?
Sure. So, in common use, when most people say theory, what they really mean in terms of science is a hypothesis, where you see something and you form some idea about how it might work. And that is, to a scientist, a hypothesis, not a theory. To a scientist, a theory is a collection of observations and experiments that all fit together to explain some natural phenomenon. And it's not just some hunch or even an educated guess. It's, like I said, a series of things that have come together to really support an idea or an explanation.
So gravity is considered, there's a theory of gravity, right?
Right. So we know through lots of experiments and lots of observations, we know a lot of things about gravity. We know how to calculate the effects of gravity. We know how to predict what gravity is going to do. But that doesn't mean we know everything about gravity. There are still some things we don't understand about it. And there could come a time when our current theory of gravity is disproven. But that doesn't mean it's just some guess that someone made one day about, I think gravity might work like this. And he wrote down the theory of gravity. Years and years and years of experiments and observations and repeated experiments by different scientists.
So that's one thing I remember about being a science writer, is that one thing that makes it difficult for scientists to communicate with the general public is that scientists, we understand that nothing is ever proven the end, right? Like, we're always discovering new things or nuances or some slightly different aspect to something. So for a scientist, is it fair to say that nothing is ever considered an absolute fact?
Yeah, I mean, a really great example that I was reading about just a couple of days ago is Lamarckian Inheritance. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where it was a theory that people had that what you did in your life directly affected the abilities your offspring would have, your children would have. So if you were really practicing basketball all through your life and you developed great talent at basketball, then all your kids would be great basketball players just automatically. And of course, what we know about genetics now, that doesn't quite add up. And so for a long time, this theory, this Lamarckian inheritance, was completely discredited. But now we're finding out that there are certain behaviors that actually do cause changes to your genetics that can be passed on to your children. Unfortunately, not basketball playing, but other things that you can do that can have an effect on what abilities and even behaviors your children have.
I remember that was being discovered just as I finished graduate school. We're going to completely geek out here, but is it methylation of the genome
Yeah,
that?
yeah, that's one of the methods that it uses to kind of pass this genetic information on. There are other things that happen to the DNA. The big term we use is epigenetics to talk about that.
Right, okay. Yeah, and I remember at the time thinking, gosh, that sounds Lamarckian, which is this thing that used to be a theory and then wasn't, and now it's sort of back again. But so, and that's, so there are these sets of these words that have a different meaning in science than they do in with the general public. So it's not really a misuse to say, that something is just a theory when you're talking about, the reason your neighbor didn't rake up his leaves or something. But it is a use that can confuse people when then they go try to understand science.
Yes.
Another word that comes to mind is significant. If I say something is significant, it sort of generally means it's important, but that has a different meaning in science too, right?
Yes. Yeah, to a scientist, significance means there's some statistical test that's been done to show that the whatever it is that is significant has statistical power behind it. It's not just something that seems important. It's been mathematically proven to be important.
Right, like it's within the rate of error that wouldn't happen by chance, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay, and then another one I thought of is organic. So if I say something is organic, I think, I'm actually not even sure exactly what it means, but I think of it as being generally healthy, not grown with chemicals, for example. Maybe they didn't use artificial fertilizer or bug killer. But in science, organic means something different, right?
Right, yeah. In science, organic would typically mean carbon or things made of carbon. Yeah.
Like organic chemistry, which was one of the hardest classes I ever took.
Yeah, it's a killer. Yeah.
And then how about one more? Let's say a positive feedback loop. That sounds good, positive, right? That sounds like something good, but it actually isn't necessarily good in science.
Yeah, it can depend on the context. In a scientific context, a positive feedback loop is some signal that just keeps building on itself and escalating higher and higher. And that may be good, but it may also be bad, depending on what that signal is turning on or off.
Right. So these different uses of the word, they're not actually misuses, but you do need to keep in mind that they have different meanings in science than they do in everyday life. So, and actually within theory, there is, we could say, in theory, we could do more of these video chats in the future, and that's another completely different use of the word theory.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to wrap it up for today. I'm Mignon Fogarty, Grammar Girl, and Lee and I are both part of the Quick and Dirty Tips podcast network. So you can find both of us at quickanddirtytips.com.